joined today by Keith Coughlan, Executive Chairman of European Metals. Keith, thanks for your time.
Thank you, David. Good to see you.
Have you had a busier end to a year ever?
No, but it's good. It's good. You know, we've obviously had a quiet period prior to that and delays and that sort of thing. So having a busy end and the couple of very significant developments that came through right at the end of the year has been fantastic.
For people who are new to the company or even existing investors, can you revisit why the last 2 months of 2025 and into 2026 is so pivotal for the company?
Okay, so fundamentally with European Metals, we are the developer and 49% shareholder of the Cinovec Lithium Project in the Czech Republic, a very large lithium resource, historic underground tin mine where they mine tin for 600 odd years, and by far the largest hard rock lithium resource in the European Union. So towards the end of last year, we delivered 2 very significant developments. The first, the definitive feasibility study that we've been working on for some time to produce 37,500 tonnes per annum of battery-grade lithium carbonate, which is, you know, globally significant production quantity. And we also delivered the fantastic news that the Czech Government had awarded the project a grant of 360 million euros, so Aussie dollars 620, 630 odd million Aussie dollars. So a very significant amount of money, which in itself, just the quantum of money is obviously very important, but perhaps even more so is what that says about the support for the project politically, financially, and to my way of thinking, underpins the fact that Cinovec will go into production.
The DFS in a lot of ways confirms a number of things when it relates to a project. For Cinovec, what did the DFS confirm?
So it confirms the production of, you know, 37,500 tonnes per annum. It also, you know, it's a non-conventional lithium deposit if you consider it against the spodumene deposits here in Western Australia that the market is no doubt more familiar with because it's a mica. So, you know, that was always a barrier to demonstrate what we could do from the mica deposit and do it in Europe, you know, because, you know, frankly, there hasn't been a great number of new mining projects come on in the European Union for some time now, particularly developed by publicly listed companies in Australia. So it's very important from that point of view, and it goes to confidence in the project, confidence in the regime now in the EU that this is real, that the Europeans are committed to developing their own critical raw materials where possible. Now, we've known for some time that they're committed to an electric vehicle future and that they're committed to a battery industry. But the mining of their critical raw materials has been the missing link, if you like. And for the permitting to come through, for the funding to come through, and prior to that, the acknowledgement of the project as a strategic project under the Critical Raw Materials Act, I think opens the way up now for renewed investment in mining in Europe from the traditional mining sources.
Does the delivery of these milestones change the nature of the conversations you're having?
Absolutely.
Obviously, pre-DFS, it was a certain conversation. Does it change the nature of that now?
Absolutely. So, you know, the other thing that's changed, obviously, over the last month or two has been the dynamics of the lithium market itself. And we've seen a very significant increase in the lithium price globally. So that also helps. And in many respects, you know, there's a bit of luck involved in that. Obviously, we have no say over it. But the project is maturing, if you like, at exactly the right time. But in terms of discussions, offtake discussions, further funding discussions, yes, it changes the playing field completely, because, you know, there is now the obvious commitment from the Czech Government, from the EU, to assist in developing the project, which means that a European offtake entity who might have previously sourced lithium from what you might call more traditional places, all of a sudden now realises that this project is real, it's going into production, and it has the support of the powers that be across the EU and across the Czech Republic. So it gives us a great deal more credibility in talking to these people about those sorts of things.
And you've recently confirmed that the environmental impact assessment for this project has been lodged on time. What does that lodgement mean in the delivery of this project?
So two key things. Firstly, it's part of the overall permitting process, which, you know, we obviously need to go through between now and final investment decision. So it's important simply from that point of view. It's a requirement for our final mining permit. But in addition to that, we made the announcement perhaps 12 months ago of a grant for the project from the Just Transition Fund, much smaller than the grant we've just announced, but still significant, 36 odd million US dollars equivalent. And the awarding of the EIA, or the approval of the EIA, is the final milestone in being able to draw down on those funds. So the EIA is slated to be approved by the end of June this year. We believe it could well happen earlier than that from the conversations we've been having with the ministry. But it would be important from both of those points of view. Firstly, just that the permitting process is operating as it should, and in fact potentially quicker than it might otherwise, but also from the point of view of now being able to, or then being able to tap into that Just Transition Fund grant, which we've earmarked for early stage works. We can start doing some of the work on site even before final investment decision comes along.
You've touched on the macro thematics, both in terms of the lithium price, but also the thematic in the EU around security of supply. How does this project fit into the cycle? We're seeing a rising market for lithium price and a growing interest in EU security. Is this project coming in at the right time?
Absolutely, yeah, as I said, and you know, we have to acknowledge there's a bit of luck in that as well. But so what's happened over the last 12 months, if you like, has been a greater commitment in the EU to a measure of mineral security, not just lithium, but obviously from our point of view, lithium. And there's been the conversation for some years about securing supply outside of China. But more recently, with what's happened geopolitical with the US, and the US's, the Trump regime's initiatives to secure critical minerals for Europe, for the US industry, has flowed into the EU, and they've seen that this is really something they need to do for themselves. When the Critical Raw Materials Act was first announced, the two key tenets of it were providing additional finance and speeding up the permitting process, so two things that we're already seeing start to happen for the Cinovec project. But the EU made an aspirational statement that by 2030 they wanted to see 10% of all the battery metals consumed in Europe to be mined in Europe and 40% to be processed in Europe. And obviously Cinovec does both of those things, mining and processing. So seeing those aspirational statements become reality, or a strong measure of reality, is very encouraging. And it means that, you know, the production of 37,500 tonnes per annum goes a long way towards that first aspiration of 10% of all the lithium consumed in Europe in 2030 to be mined in Europe. So it's very important.
Seeing a lot of M&A in the sector, certainly consolidation, but also acquisition and investment in strategic assets that are developing or developed. Where does this project sit in that discussion? You may not want to disclose it, but where does this project sit in that discussion? Yeah,
look, in general terms, it's obviously a globally significant project. It has been always, simply because of the size of the resource, 7.5 million tonnes of lithium carbonate equivalent in the ground. But for the reasons I spoke about with regards to the recent history of mining in Europe, it perhaps hasn't been uppermost in the general market's mind. I think now seeing this commitment to the project, the funding for the project, and the overall commitment to the geopolitical theorem of it from the EU, means that it must come on the radar of global lithium players. The other fact is that it's a very big project, and if you look at the EMH share price relative to our share of the MPV of the project, we're trading at a fraction of the value, if you like. So, that's something we would like to address very soon, and work on ways to get to bridge the gap between our current market cap and our share of the project's MPV.
Looking at funding, as you move into the funding of development and further works, obviously a DFS delivered, approvals in place, EU support. How does the funding package start to evolve, and how do you build optionality and flexibility into that funding?
So first of all, there are the grants that we spoke about, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have this EIA approved as soon as possible, because it allows us to start accessing the Just Transition Fund money. The larger grant, the 360 million euros, is from construction on, so we can't access that prior to final investment decision, but the Just Transition Fund money we can. And despite the fact it's only a small portion of what's required to build the project, the Just Transition Fund money, it's very important for early stage works, but it's also important in that it can delay what we need to do in terms of otherwise funding GeoMet. And that's important as well as we come up the curve towards final investment decision, because obviously you add value with every development towards final investment decision, including confirmation of permitting and that sort of thing. We have seen other projects in Europe receive strong support from the European Investment Bank, from KfW, German Export Credit Finance, the German government's Critical Raw Material Fund, and these are all entities and groups that we have had preliminary discussions with during the DFS period, and now with the completion of the DFS and the approval of the major grant, those conversations become significantly more formal. So there's still a lot to do. There's a lot of money to be raised, but we've already seen the commitment to the project at the very highest level in the EU, and I think we will see that continue. It also increases the level of discussion around offtake, and as we've always thought, offtake will obviously form a significant part of the funding equation as well.
You talk about support and you talk about commitment, EU, the local government entity, other funding groups. How committed is CHES to this project?
Oh, they're fully committed. So CHES is 69% owned by the Czech Government, and it's the Czech Government that's just awarded the project 360 million euros. So I think it's fair to say they're fully committed to this. And CHES has been fully committed to the energy transition for some considerable time. Their history is in mining coal, burning coal to generate electricity, but they have been moving away from that thematic for some years. They already have significant solar assets, they have significant wind farm assets, they're involved in a small nuclear reactor program, they own all of the electric vehicle charging stations across the Czech Republic. So yes, CHES is fully committed to this project.
As we move further into 2026, what are the milestones investors should be focusing on? What are the big ticket items that you think will move the dial?
So the permitting is obviously key to getting us towards that final investment decision, and part of the permitting is things like the environmental impact assessment, etc. So as we tick those boxes over the course of the next few months, there will be news flow from that point of view, but also I think increased confidence, increased certainty level in the project. I flagged earlier the revisiting of offtake discussions and strategic partner discussions. I think we'll also see significantly more news flow in the area of the macro. Firstly, just the overall lithium market. We saw the significant announcement out of CATL, the largest EV battery manufacturer in the world, overnight, of a $17 billion order for cathode active material for their LFP, lithium iron phosphate batteries. Clearly that has to have an impact on demand. And interestingly, they didn't state the pricing in lithium carbonate equivalent terms, but with a couple of assumptions that looks to be concluded in the mid-20s from the point of view of a lithium price, which is important. We're also seeing futures, Chinese futures lithium out to the end of this year, trading at about the same level, mid-20s. So already seeing a significant upkick, and I think that will continue. I think there'll be a lot of lithium macro news flow. And specific for us in terms of the EU, I think you'll see the EU show full commitment to the thematic of EVs, batteries and critical raw materials to feed the energy transition.
With major technical work now complete, approvals progressing and clear strategic support, it's obvious that there's going to be a strong momentum into 2026 for European metals. We look forward to following with interest. Keith, thanks for your time.
Thank you, David.